Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of This is Surgery. We're very lucky to kick things off today with our very own Nadine Hachach-Haram, founder and CEO of Proximie. I'm Victoria Hatcher, VP Commercial here at Proximie.
Hi, I'm Richard Carter, the Chief Technology Officer at Proximie. So, to kick things off, how would you introduce yourself?
Oh, where do I start? Well, I'm Nadine Hachach-Haram. I'm a reconstructive plastic surgeon here in London at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. I'm also the founder and CEO of Proximie. Beyond that, I'm a mother of three, originally Lebanese, but I've been living in London for over 23 years. And I'm also the co-managing partner of a health tech fund called Meridian Health Ventures.
Perfect. So, we've been working together now for a little while. I think I'm in year 5 and Proximie started a little bit before then. It's grown quite a bit in that time. Was there an aha moment where you thought, yeah, this is going to work?
Well, it's kind of goes back to how it all started. I kind of call myself a bit of an accidental entrepreneur because I never woke up one day and said, oh, I really want to set up a company or build a business around technology. I grew up wanting to be a surgeon, wanting to make a difference in people's lives. At the age of 13, growing up in Lebanon during war, I had seen trauma and blast and injury firsthand. And it was that experience that really made me want to become a surgeon, particularly a reconstructive plastic surgeon, because I felt I could really make a difference in people's quality of life as a sequelae to these unfortunate events. And that was really my path, helping people. But over time and over many years of being involved in global surgery, of working with medical device companies, of working as a surgeon myself, I could see the cracks and the areas where surgery needed to be better, where the process around surgery to enable better access, better quality, and more workforce around surgery needed to change. And that was where I discovered the opportunity for technology to intersect with healthcare, and where those things together could hopefully really amplify the delivery of care. And it was in 2013, 2014, I think Pokemon Go had come out and Google Glass and all these different technologies. And I thought, what if we used the glass to connect to other surgeons and work together? Is there a way that we could, virtually scrub into other operating rooms? And that's kind of how it started as a research project. Did some trials, started to work in really austere environments to see, could we really stress test this concept? And it was amazing. I mean, I remember in the town of Trujillo in Peru, we were using this to support the delivery of cleft lip and palate training. And for those who don't know, cleft lip and palate surgery is very intricate surgery. Millimeters matter. And I thought if you could do that kind of surgery with this kind of technology, you could pretty much do anything. And it was then in 2016, as we started to use it in more of these environments, that CNN caught wind of what we were doing and published just a very simple editorial: could this technology be the future of surgery? And it was then and there when I saw the response and the reaction to that from people, the public, from investors, from surgeons, just the excitement of, this really out-of-the-box thinking that we could create these digitally native operating rooms, was when I really thought that I was onto something. There was still a big, big mountain to climb at that point. But I definitely took a decision at that point that this was something I wanted to pursue, and hence the accidental entrepreneur. It's always so humbling when you talk about your journey and your story. Just talk a little bit about how Proximie has evolved since then. Well, what was really important, one, we need to understand, this is a really complex problem. Surgery touches everyone's lives. I mean, I think there was a study that showed that any person at any one time at any time in their lives would have somewhere between, I think, 7 to 9 procedures. And it could be as simple as removing a mole to, God forbid, something far more complex. And so it does affect all of us. But it is complex because, we have to think about the environment. Operating rooms are incredibly expensive environments for hospitals. They're big revenue drivers for hospitals as well. There's a lot of bureaucracy around surgery and operating rooms. It's not just about the surgeon and the patient, although we'd love to think that it is, but, it's the whole team. It's the administrators around it. It's the business behind it. It's the medical devices that you have to use. So it is a complex, multimodal kind of system. And what we need to also recognize is that surgery and operating rooms themselves, there's a lot of data in those environments. And yet it's a very analog environment today. And so Proximie really started on how are we going to really, address this big complex problem, but in bite-sized pieces where we can actually try to influentially change the way we do surgery, the way we deliver surgery. And so rather than going straight to data-driven insights and decision intelligence and all of that, we said, well, how do we first get healthcare workers comfortable with video, audio, these technologies in operating rooms in an environment that has been very traditional for a very, very long time? And so my first point was, well, we need to first create a value exchange with the users in the room. What are they getting out of solutions like a Proximie? Well, it's about, the workforce. It's about support. It's about education. It's about training. It's about, we've all been, if you've operated enough, you'll be in an environment where you're like, oh my God, this is a really difficult case. I wish I had an extra pair of eyes or hands in this environment. And so that was first about how do we create the support infrastructure around the frontline care deliverers. And so Proximie started off with telepresence because we felt that by that, one, it would force us to build a sophisticated stack from day one, which would be future-proof. But two, we would really take the surgeons and nurses and anesthetists on the journey with us by creating that value for them. And that proved itself brilliantly. I mean, we showed we could train twice as many doctors and nurses in half the time. We were doubling almost quarter on quarter in terms of users, operating rooms, people that were using it. And we worked with some of the biggest medical device companies around the world, helping them scale the adoption of their devices through proctoring and preceptorship. But that was never the only path that we had for Proximie. We always knew there was going to be a longer term path of really taking these operating rooms and turning them into borderless, dynamic, data-driven environments. And so once we were in and supporting that exchange, we started to have really thoughtful conversations with the healthcare workers. Like, wouldn't it be helpful for you if we could actually catalog these cases for you as well? So it's not just a written op note at the end of a procedure, but you actually now have the case video, obviously anonymized and properly secure, where you could learn from the case. You could share that learning with someone else. You could identify areas for improvement or actually identify really great things you have done that others should do as well. And so that was what forced us then to build the media management solution that we built, which might seem simple, but actually trying to pull together lots of data from, and again, Richard's laughing here because
it is actually quite tricky.
Yeah. So how do you capture video data, audio data, device data, medical record data, imaging data? I mean, pulling that all, time-stamping it, collecting it together is not easy. But that's why we're lucky to have great engineers and product leads at Proximie that have helped us think through that. And once we were there, it's always then that thoughtful discussion that you have with the clinical teams and the administrators, like, what more could you get? You have all this incredibly rich data now, cataloged, collated, curated. What insights do you want to derive from this? What would you want to know? If you had eyes and ears in every OR, what would you want to know? And so we started to look at the key pain points that we're seeing in healthcare today, which frankly, I think are the same everywhere in the world, around productivity, around quality, around access. And we need to sweat the assets that we have. We can't just magically go build 50,000 new operating rooms. I mean, every hospital is limited with what they have, the real estate they have, and the infrastructure they have. So, and the staffing and the equipment and all of those things. And so let's look at first what we have and how do we make best use of what we have? How do we make sure that our doctors and nurses are not spending all their time in doing documentation, but actually we're using that time so they're operating the top of their license? How do we make sure that the data we're capturing can enable us to think more holistically about the environment we're using and how do we use it better? How do we make sure we get more patients through the operating room? And what we identified by having our technology in the room is that, on average, OR utilization is around 65%, 75%. And that's not just UK, that's everywhere. And I've surveyed colleagues in the US, I've surveyed colleagues in the Middle East. They all have this similar problem. And so if we can give them real data, objective data, an objective source of truth on where are the gaps, why, how do we move it from 65 to 85? I'm not even saying 100%, like just let's move it to 85. What do we need to do? And so that insight that we can bring is hugely valuable for health systems because they're able to drive more throughput, but also hugely valuable for healthcare workers that want to do more for their patients.
We're going to come back to AI because we have to. But before I get there, obviously being a surgeon is still so much part of your identity. You started with it in your introduction. How do you bring, your knowledge of the operating room into the product?
I think there's definitely, something I've been very passionate about, and it's why I've maintained and retained my clinical practice is because there is that intimate knowledge and experience of actually being in that environment and doing it yourself and seeing both the beauty of like changing people's lives and being part of that, but also the gaps and the challenges that we need to overcome. And it's much more, I think, humbling and more authentic if you're actually in the field doing the work and learning from it and bring it back than just, I'm going to assume this is what surgeons experience and therefore we're going to build this product. And so I love that. I mean, I love that, you know, I have the privilege of working with people like you to like build this great product and hear from the market and share what we're doing. But that I also sit in the coffee room with doctors and nurses in between cases and we have a conversation about, you know, what's upsetting us that day and what are some of the challenges and the friction points in health systems, which I think is everywhere. So I think that is definitely gives us, I think, as a company, a unique perspective and an advantage, if I can call it that. And finally, I'll say it's because I'm one of, you know, when I have conversations with health systems, with doctors, nurses, I'm one of you. I do the same thing you do every single day. The pain you feel, I feel too. And the win you want to have, which is delivering care for your patients, is the win I want to have too. And so there is that. And, you know, I'll end by saying it is the most humbling thing. You know, I get all this amazing experience of like being in a tech startup and all that sort of pizzazz that you get a bit with that. But I'm also in the OR for 6-7 hours operating with colleagues. And that's very, very humbling.
I'm just going to end with one more question. Maybe you ask one more question as well. From an AI perspective, we can't do this without mentioning AI. Talk a little bit about sort of how AI is used within Proximie, but also I'm really interested to know about, you know, where you think AI is taking us and the opportunity within healthcare at large.
Well, I'd love this question to be perhaps even more of a conversation. So I'll say a few things, but maybe Richard also be great to hear from you, given you're probably more of an expert than I am. But it is very interesting. I was at an event yesterday. I might just want to share this little tidbit, but then we'll come back to the question. Someone asked I can't name the person, but a very, very, very knowledgeable person in the space of AI, what their view on AI was in general, like in healthcare, but in all, you know, all aspects of life. And he said something it's a big question. And he said something very interesting. He said, AI is overhyped now in terms of the use cases and how we're, you know, how we're thinking about it. But he said, I think it's incredibly underhyped for what the next 5 to 10 years will be, particularly with the impending, presentation of AGI and what that can do for the world. And so we're getting very excited now, but it still is more assistive, the AI. It's still more of a supportive action. But with AGI, it will be an independent entity. And I think that we're sort of not really thinking enough about, and it's sort of undervalued at this point, like what that impact can be. And perhaps the more assistive is probably overhyped. But it is part of that journey we have to go through to get to AGI, which has a lot of, you know, what's the world going to look like in 5 to 10 years, I think was the main question. And so that was a very interesting perspective, I think, that he shared. When I think about AI, and again, not being a technical engineering expert, I just think less about the concept of the technology, but more about the impact that is having in our day-to-day lives. And in particular in healthcare, you know, if we can amplify the workforce, if we can improve productivity, if we can bring more accuracy to what we do, if we can reduce documentation. I mean, healthcare workers spend at least 30% of their working lives like documenting. Like, how do we take all of that away so we're spending more time with patients, spending more time thinking about complex medical comorbid patients and how we're going to address that? So I think there is an important role for AI, for automation around that. And we at Proximie have been leaning in from day one, really, through different components. Some things have been more on the back end. I'm sure Richard can speak to it. Not things that people see, just in terms of how adaptive our platform is, how it adapts to the connectivity, to the different feeds we have. That is all a lot of intelligence that's been built into the engine, which is why we didn't roll up third-party softwares. We actually built it ourselves so that we have a lot of that capability. But it's also now on the front end where we're able to automatically and ambiently identify, you know, case start, case finish, wheels in, wheels out, phases of a procedure, and over time, automate notifications, documentation, op notes, coding. These are all components where AI is going to play an important role and has played an important role in Proximie's journey. But maybe, Richard, your view.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the very first thing you mentioned, because I too think we all overestimate what we're going to get in 2 years and underestimate what we're going to get in 10. And for me, AI happening now does for data what the birth of the internet did for communication. So now we don't really think about sending emails or sending texts. We just assume that we can always reach anyone, anytime. And I think what we'll see over the course of the next 10 years is people will naturally assume that there is data available and something that has helped them make a decision, and that it's not just them, that actually better decisions become the norm. And for me, what's really interesting, and what I wanted to go on to, is kind of, I think there's different levels of readiness for that. Like, are we really willing to let a machine become the data expert because they assess so much more data than we can? And I'm interested in your experiences as both as a surgeon and as a CEO, and as you promote and develop and deliver this future, how are people receiving it?
It's a great question. And I think it almost depends in the use cases. If I think about the more, let's call it administrative use cases, like writing emails, responding, synthesizing, like, I had a report yesterday that was sent to me. It was a 304-page report. Like, I just stuck it in GPT and said, can you produce a very detailed summary for me? Like, it's hard to read, who has time to read a 304-page report? So I think in those sense, and in the co-pilot type environment, I think loads of people are embracing that because it's just making you far more efficient. And producing those content and materials, I think we're seeing a lot of great use cases around that. I think in healthcare, it depends also within the segment. So AI in radiology has been around for a long time. I mean, they've been the very early adopters. We've seen more recently, finally, companies like Skin Analytics be approved, where you're thinking about mole assessment. I mean, there's amazing use cases around AI. And for us, I think in surgery, around automation of surgery, we're just starting. But there's so much potential if you think about automation surgery, autonomous surgery, robotics, and others where this is going to make a big, big difference. So I am excited. I think it depends on the use cases. But I can say, even with my hospital, they are leaning in and wanting to embrace. Clearly starting off with more corporate services type use cases, but both here stateside and in the Middle East, we're seeing a huge desire to lean into AI and identify really good, compelling use cases where there's valuable ROI that is showing impact both to patients and to the staff as well.
So to conclude, in one word, what does surgery mean to you?
Purpose.
Thank you, Nadine. I've been Victoria.
I've been Richard.
And thanks for watching this episode of This is Surgery.